Welcome to Gospel Legacy in New York City, a podcast created by City to City, New York City. As the biblical message of hope and redemption has made its way throughout this vibrant metropolis, it hasn't only touched individual people, but inspired acts of compassion, justice, community renewal, and even widespread revival.
Harlem is this place that's known by many people. It has extreme historical significance.
We're a neighborhood that's forgotten on the tourist maps, and so we're sort of self-contained, and it brings a complexity with that immigrant downbeat that goes through hard things.
Today, in the midst of the city's challenges, the gospel still brings light to dark places, healing to broken lives, and unity to divided communities. Through the seen and unseen efforts of church communities, God's love is made real in tangible ways.
My name is Kristian. I'm a pastor here in New York City of Hope Church NYC.
I am the pastor of Redeemer East Harlem.
I am the communications director at Renaissance Church, which is in West Harlem.
We know that God has long been at work in this great city. He's always at work. It's our prayer that every borough, every home, and every heart will experience the hope of Jesus Christ.
In the post-Christian world, what if we were so ridiculously generous that people could see the kind of love and care that was evidenced by our money, our time, and our energy?
We just care. So there's so many great organizations doing the practical work to care for people. But if you don't miss them, they're really not going to miss you.
Leaders, pastors, and church planners in these conversations share valuable insights, core practices, and stories that we hope will inspire and transform the way you look at ministry in the city of New York.
We are your host. I'm Kristian Hernandez.
I'm Jennifer Chan.
Welcome, listeners. In this episode, we have a special treat for you as we introduce two influential figures from Redeemer City to City. Joining us are Steve Shackelford, the CEO of Redeemer City to City, and Mark Reynolds, Senior Strategic Advisor. These leaders have been instrumental in driving gospel movements not only in New York City, but around the globe. In this episode, we'll dive into their personal journeys, the pivotal moments that shaped them, and how they've been prepared for their current roles. To kick things off, we posed a question inspired by our late friend Jay Kyle, a foundational figure at City to City, who once asked about a strong childhood memory that revealed something about who you were meant to become. It's a question that offers deep insight. Listen as Steve and Mark share their own stories.
Okay, so today's a great day for our listeners because they get to meet two people we've mentioned in other episodes. Our guests are pillars of Redeemer City to City, leaders impacting gospel movement here in New York and around the globe. We're excited for you all to get to know them a bit better. So Steve and Mark, today's a chance for our listeners to learn more about your journeys, about key people and moments that have shaped you, and how God has prepared you for the positions that you both now hold. So our dearly missed friend Jay Kyle, who Tim Keller considered one of the founders of City to City, he once asked me this question that I've never forgotten. He asked me for a strong childhood memory. What was the earliest memory I had of doing something I felt like I was meant to do? And then he shared about leading a group of friends to build a fort in the woods. There was water involved, maybe a stream or river. And for Jay, this was a clue as to the kind of person God designed him to be. So I'd like to know what would one of those early childhood memories be for you, where you felt this might be something I'm meant to do? Should we start with you, Mark?
Sure. One of my memories, I think, that gave me a bit of a taste of what I would like to do or the kind of person I might become is that at my school, my neighborhood, when I was in 4th through 6th grade, I was always convening people to play sports. So during school, after school, I was going and tugging people to play sports of all kinds. And then it was always my responsibility to kind of divide the teams up evenly because I loved things to be competitive. I didn't mind if we won or lost. I just wanted it to be a good, sporty time. And my grandmother, at the time, she would comment and she goes, "Mark, you're always just gathering up people, trying to do things together. And people seem to follow you, and you're not really interested in just doing things just to be so that your team can win. You're actually just trying to create a fun, competitive experience."
That's good. Well, for it's an interesting question. For me, I had a mother that was a believer. My father didn't become a believer until I was probably 10 or 11. But my mother was a deeply prayerful woman. And I think, she never put a pressure on me, but she always thought that I would be a Southern Baptist pastor. I think that was her dream. I don't know if she would say that today, but I didn't feel a call into that. So it's sort of ironic today that I'm working with lots of pastors in this age, but I really felt a call in to business, but in a long way around, ironically, with what Mom's prayer was, just got fulfilled in a crazy different way for me to be able to work alongside leaders and pastors in New York City and around the globe. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about journey, but she actually prayed. Back in the 1980s, the CPA exam was 2.5 days. It was, and she prayed literally on her knees for me for 22 hours over the course of those 3 days during that exam. That's so I just had a mom that really prayed for both my brother and me.
Thank you, Steve. Mark, could you share formative influence in your life? Key people?
Sure.
A person?
A person, yes. I think while we're, since we're talking about the topic of ministry and cities, one that precedes my time coming to New York, which would have been over 20 years ago. So it would have been kind of maybe halfway between the story I shared when I was gathering people to play sports and where we are today. I was a rookie missionary sent to the Manila, Philippines with my young family. And the field director there was a gentleman named Paul Taylor. I was there with the mission agency out of my denomination called Mission to the World. And he was an excellent mentor and supervisor for me. He knew a lot about church planting. He knew a lot about navigating the challenge of cross-cultural ministry. He was good at so many things, from preaching to leading to communicating with the team to raising money, and in particular about how to think about the process and systems to support church planting. So that was probably about 24, 25 years ago. And I always wanted to be as skillful as he was, particularly in dealing with all the cross-cultural challenges of dealing with the Filipino context. Lovely people, but the culture very different. And I was amazed at his ability to navigate those challenges and also give lots of insights to help the leaders we're working with plant and start healthy, multiplying churches. So I'm really thankful. I think he retired several years ago. And I look back with fond memories at him shaping me for several years. And then during the midst of that, I was a rookie missionary. About 6 to 12 months later, he got promoted to be the international director for the whole region. So then he appointed me to kind of take his role. Didn't feel very prepared. I said, hey, if you're going to do that, hey, make sure you stay close. I need your help because I'm navigating a lot of new things.
Wow.
But that challenging assignment, along with his mentoring, was significant for me.
It's really a privilege just to get to hear some of your stories, stories that we wouldn't really get to excavate during our normal everyday work interactions. Hearing about your grandmother, I could just picture young Mark convening people for sports. Some things don't seem to change. You continue to do that now. And I don't think I'll forget that story for the rest of my life. Your mother praying 20 plus hours
Absolutely.
while you took your CPA exam. That's unbelievable. And so keeping in step with kind of this motif of journey, beginning with you, Steve, because prior to leading City to City as CEO, as you mentioned, you were primed for a successful career in the marketplace. And so would love for you to tell us a bit about your journey from then to now.
I know we always hear, the truth, God doesn't, waste anything in your journey. I did have I did get a degree and then an MBA and became a CPA and started with what we call the Big 8 at the public accounting firms back in the day. And I was with one called Price Waterhouse, and I started my first day on the Disney job. So Disney was my account. I was in Orlando, Florida. I'd met my wife at 17, and we went to separate schools, but dated for 6 years and got married the week after I got my MBA and started work the next week. and Disney got put on the Disney job. And that led up me 6 years into our marriage in 1992 to Paris, France, and was on the Euro Disney account, or Disneyland Paris now, for 3 years. And that was just an incredibly difficult experience and beautiful experience. And there's a lot of stories out of that I didn't know at the time that God was forming and using for something that wouldn't happen for 20 more years. But it was in Paris that I would describe it, and Mark's heard this probably 10 times, but was a stirring that began to occur. I actually started writing some letters I would have been 32 or 33. I'm 60 now. And so I was writing these ministries to say, I could be your CFO, and nothing happened. And I ended up with an incredible experience there that led me to New York. So I was in New York, working at 6th and 50th with PwC's national office. But I wasn't seeing my kids awake between Sunday night and Saturday morning. By that time, we had a 6-year-old little boy and a 3-year-old little girl, and I was living up in Connecticut and commuting an hour and 40 minutes each way. And I couldn't do anymore. And it led to me taking a CFO job down in Orlando and going kind of in a circle. We started there and lived a 1/4-mile walk from my in-laws and 3 miles from my parents. And for 20 years, I was with a company that I had some unique experiences there. But all along the way, at different points, this stirring would arise. And I didn't know what it was. In fact, I tried to push the door open a couple times for ministry roles that the Lord just shut it. And by the time I turned 50 in 2013, I had kind of given up on that. I didn't think that was going to happen. In 2016, one of the pastors of the church I was in Orlando was doing work with Jay Kyle and in South Asia. And he said to me that Redeemer City to City is looking for potentially a business person to lead it because it's complex, it's very global, it's growing, and you should look at the job description, he said. And I laughed. I can still remember exactly where I was when I took that call, and I laughed. I said, I'm in Orlando. I had been highly influenced by Tim Keller, and all the way back to when I first heard him in 1998 in Jacksonville, Florida, at a conference. And I followed, and I was trying to find his white papers because I teach Sunday school, but just highly influenced. And then I read the job description when it came out, and it just grabbed me. And I told my wife, I said, this is low probability. I'm in Orlando. I didn't know anybody but this part-time pastor that worked for Jay. But I started writing the essays. God had put a missionary, a pioneers missionary that had served the Uyghurs in Northwest China in our home. They were on a leave. Wow. And so I was able to process questions. They were highly influenced by Tim. And so all along the way, between July of 2016 and November of 2016, God was just doing this. You thought your experience in Paris was for this reason. Wow. You thought this relationship was for this reason. There's 7 key stories along the way where the call became so clear that you need to leave and go. And so, but even the funny part about it is, even after they give me the job, they said, we want to talk to your wife. You're going to move to New York City at the age of 53 from Orlando to this. And I tell you, I think I can, and you guys know this because you've heard this before, but I did a ton of due diligence on City to City. And I was just blown away, but I'm even more blown away now after in my 8th year here and what's happening here in New York, what's happening globally. Lisa and I often say we can't imagine our lives without the last 7 years. Wow. So I hope that wasn't too long, but that's the journey and the story of how I got here and get the privilege to work. With the funny story about Mark Reynolds is that I was told all about him by the board, and you need to get to know Mark because Mark was critical and key because this guy's done about every job over his 20 years at City to City, and it's been such a blessing and a resource to work with Mark.
That's a heck of a transition.
There you go, Mark.
Yeah,
you've done every job.
You have. You've done
probably yes. Except I've never been a leader of the organization. So
you're a leader.
Wow, what an encouraging story. I really appreciated hearing how God was orchestrating the journey that ultimately led Steve and his family to move to New York City as the CEO of City to City.
Next, we turn to Mark. Mark's worn many hats at City to City and has had significant impact on pastors and leaders around the globe. What makes Mark's origin story particularly interesting is his transition from the mission field in Asia to the fast-paced life of New York City, all while raising a young family. Listen as we ask Mark to share how his journey with City to City began and what continues to fuel his passion after all these years later.
And I do like the origin story because it does show God's good providence, but also required much faith from me and my spouse, because we didn't really know if it would actually happen. As we were finishing our term in Manila, we were exploring, where do we go next? We were thinking, do we go to another field? And began corresponding with some leaders at Redeemer. And for about 6 months, very little, they weren't communicating with me. There wasn't a job even being posted. So I thought, I'm a fool to keep trying to interact. And my wife is like, I think God's calling us there. So she's praying and fasting. And I'm a man of little faith going, really? I just don't, there's not a job. Why would they want me? So there was a little bit of work in the background. Jay Kyle came and visited me when I was in Manila and said, Mark, maybe that's something that you should consider here. So 2 days before we were moving all of our things from Manila back to the States and not knowing what assignment we were going to do next, they emailed me and said, will you come to New York? So my wife and I, we fly back to the States. We drop our kids off with the grandparents that they don't know.
Wow. That's
and
true.
Fly to New York for 3 days. And in the middle of the second day, Terry Geiger, who maybe some of you know, he was executive pastor of the church, really the co-founder of City to City. As we finished the lunch, he goes, I think you should come to New York, Mark. And he goes, why don't you start looking for an apartment? I said, are you offering me a job? And he goes, yeah. And so that's the origin story. And then we went back, and then a month later moved to New York City and have been here for almost 21 years. Terry Geiger hired me. The organization was really a ministry department of Redeemer Church. It wasn't even City to City. It was something called Redeemer Church Planting Center that started around 2000, and it had 2 or 3 staff. And he said, Mark, I want you to help build this organization. And he gave me a job description. It had like 10 things I needed to do. Which I thought, and he said, you need to commit to probably 10 years because I need you to build this. I don't want you to just come here for a short time like everybody else often comes to New York, just kind of, I went to New York, I lived there, and then move on. He goes, I need you to commit to 10 years. I said, okay, I'll do that. I knew there was that much to build. Mm-hmm. And because New York was also transient and also there were some emerging global opportunities for us, I committed to those 10 years. And so I put my hand to the plow. When people would explore, hey, you want to come here and do this? I'd say, no. I always turn it away. Mm-hmm. But what's kept me then for another, let's say 10 years after that, I do think it is, I want to continue to serve the movement. I think it's something that I never anticipated, that God would continue to give us such favor with leaders globally. Yeah. When we started out, we thought, okay, this is what we think we might see happen. We didn't really imagine it would kind of grow and mature and have as many leaders that we're connected to. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to continue to be part of it. And I think it also was a good, affinity for my gifts. But then I always had to kind of adapt what I was doing because of the growing organization. So I'm fine with that because I always like a challenging assignment. I get bored after I've done something for a bit. So at City to City, I think it activates or it maintains what I would kind of call a career anchor. I'm anchored to the role because it's a challenging assignment. There's always something to figure out, something to solve for, something unknown, live by faith. And that's probably kept me here, along with the relationships.
How would you describe the ecosystem of ministry in New York City?
Yeah. And sometimes we might even call it a city ecosystem or a gospel ecosystem. And so that organic metaphor could be used in a lot of different ways, but specifically for me and applying it to New York City. If you think about the Christian evangelical Orthodox church, there's been a lot of healthy, vibrant churches, let's say perhaps in the outer boroughs. But the city has struggled for a long time. We don't really have many healthy institutions and organizations to serve the well-being of the Christian community and to serve the broader city. So I think that the city has always been fragile in that sense, and transience is an issue. So if you want to live here long-term and raise your kids, and you have Christian convictions, there aren't a lot of assets to help you in that journey, right? So we still feel that kind of frailty still. And then COVID uprooted whatever things were often there, even felt more fragile. That's how I and sometimes when I think about today, I think, gosh, do I have the energy to kind of rebuild?
Right.
Because in the last 20 years, you've seen leaders come and go. You've seen churches grow and flourish, sometimes close. And now this one requires a significant heavy lift again, just kind of emotionally, right? Do I have the spiritual and relational energy to build again? I think I do. But in the 1 or 2 years ago, I was like, wow, this is going to be a heavy lift. I don't know what's going to be on the other side of it. So the ecosystem has always been somewhat fragile and frail because of the dynamics of the cost of the city, the complexity, the diversity. But we do see encouraging signs of life. And so at the core, I think, of that ecosystem has to be churches that are growing and multiplying. And we see that continuing. That's never actually stopped. It's always been a part of the ecosystem here in New York, and hopefully that will continue. We need, many new thriving congregations to supplement the existing churches. And maybe something newer that's happening that is, I think, at a scale, if you kind of think about the church scale, you go up another scale to individual congregations coming together and think, how could we together think about serving our community? I'm seeing signs of that. I think because of all the disorientation of COVID and those disruptions caused people to go, hey, maybe there's some things we can do together better instead of trying to be maybe a little bit more isolated and siloed. And I think that's an encouraging sign, but it still is a ecosystem that has great potential. But the frailty, the cost, all those things make it, always make me go, I wonder what's next. So we do have to live by faith, of course, and then be adaptive to say, hey, what is our best contribution in this next season? It was maybe this a couple years ago. What is our best contribution
That's a good
to
question.
this ecosystem in the next season?
Can I add something for Mark?
Please.
Because I get the privilege not only of serving at Redeemer City to City on a senior leadership team with Mark, but we serve together on a global leadership team. And I think, Mark, you do have it in you for one more. And what I love about particularly this next season in Mark's ministry is he brings a weight, not just because of what he's seen here in New York, but he gets the privilege of interacting and advising. His title is Senior Strategic Advisor, but advising global leaders. So, if you think about it, he's seeing what's happening in various global cities and advising those. He has a pretty good understanding of what's happening here. And so he's bringing what he's learned from this wide spectrum. Tim always talked about the inside-outside strategy where you need an insider, right? But the outsider comes in and sees different things. And I think Mark's has a unique weight that he brings. And I think in this next season, Mark, what you continue to learn from these maturing leaders globally, I mean, we're learning from the globe.
Yes, we
right?
are.
I mean,
Yes.
it used to be New York kind of out, but now it goes both directions.
Yes. I mean, I'm very thankful for that. It does, again, thanking God for the favor we have with leaders. They've become peers. They've planted churches. They've created networks. They're building all kinds of things. So I love the growing connectivity that's happening globally and the innovation and creativity that we can continue to learn from them as well.
Yeah.
Before we move on to the next part of the interview, I'd like to take a moment to revisit what Mark talked about earlier regarding the concept of an ecosystem. We believe this level of commitment is not foreign to those of you listening, many of whom are pastors and leaders and know what it takes to build the church from the ground up or coordinate a group effort to support your communities. The idea of an ecosystem centers around an interconnected collection of people living in the same city, where the actions of one group can have an incredible ripple effect throughout. City to City often views ministry in New York City with this concept of a gospel ecosystem. Mark describes the concept of a gospel ecosystem or city ecosystem in New York City as a fragile but vital network. He highlights the presence of healthy, growing churches, particularly in the outer boroughs, but notes the ongoing struggle within the city itself to maintain strong Christian institutions that support both the faith community and the broader population. The challenges of transience, the high cost of living, and the city's diversity add to this fragility. Mark reflects on the impact of COVID-19, which further uprooted what stability existed, and the emotional and spiritual energy required to rebuild. Despite these challenges, he sees encouraging signs of life, with churches continuing to grow and multiply, and a renewed sense of collaboration among congregations. However, the ecosystem remains delicate, requiring faith and adaptability to navigate the uncertain future. For more on gospel ecosystems and their relationship to cities, we have included resources on city theology and city theory written by our friend and late co-founder, Tim Keller. Let's continue.
I'm always encouraged when Mark is encouraged, because Mark's encouragement it's birthed out of facing reality. You assess things. You're not trying to put a bow on things that are just difficult. You name them. But I love the fact that despite some of those tensions that you mentioned, that there's signs of hope that are encouraging. That's really, really exciting.
Yeah, Mark's really good about taking Jim Collins' words from Good to Great. Like, you've got to face, he helps me sometimes see the brutal facts of reality. I think that was the wording he has. And you can't really change unless you really kind of see the brutal facts. And Mark's got a real courage to him. And because he's seen so many pieces and parts, whether it be we're talking about financial information, or maybe he's had experience he understands the different dynamics and things. And so he brings a lot of different areas of expertise into the equation when we're having conversations.
I've always felt Mark was the cold water of reason on the flames of my unrealistic optimism.
Yes. Defining reality matters, but then also being hopeful what's possible.
Yes.
Right.
That's a beautiful marriage right there. Well, Steve, thank you for adding to Mark's response, but I would love to hear your thoughts when you think of the concept of a ministry ecosystem that's this ongoing work in New York City and around the globe.
Right.
What surfaces for you?
Well, the things I think about when I think about New York City, and again, Mark and you guys are much closer to the ground, but for me, it's just phenomenal to watch and get an experience and see what's happening here in the different areas, from community engagement and evangelism, of course, around church planting. But I think what's really neat for me, because of my particular role, which has a lot of engagement at levels with the global part of the equation, is to see how important the New York City gospel ecosystem, to use Mark's term, is to the globe. I think Robert Guerrero often talks about, I've heard him say, New York City is kind of a research lab or learning lab, where there's a lot of learnings going on, which is important. And Tim would often talk about New York City's more similar to, Singapore or Hong Kong than it might be to a town in Middle America. Right. But so how does that learning, which I think historically, back when Mark, in the early years, it tended to go one way. Even when I came 7 years ago, all the global leaders came to New York City and was trained. And now it's in 10 languages in Asia Pacific, et cetera. So that's happening out there. But so the learning now, if you think about a platform concept, is coming both directions, which I just think is fascinating, because New York City still, it's critical and unique, but there's learnings happening in various cities that we could name that I think are influencing even the work here. So
that's beautiful. Thank you.
Well, Mark, you mentioned the word movement earlier. It's a word we like a lot at City to City. And so those of us who have the joy and privilege of spending our time helping to start and strengthen churches, it's a great work, but we always say, we're not just about starting and strengthening churches. We long to see a movement of the gospel in New York and around the world. And so just to help our listeners get a better sense of what we mean by the word movement, could you briefly describe gospel movement? And as a part two, if we can get to it, what kind of legacy of gospel movement you feel we're building on at this time?
Sure. Well, maybe to get to the first part, movement, which is a word that can be thrown out there and mean various things. And so maybe using a more generic way, I see movement as being a cause driven by people that are trying to subvert something. So usually there's conditions that said, hey, we realize that we can't do it by ourselves. So we need people that are dedicated to a cause. We want to see change, and it has some viral attributes to it that cause it. So in the world, we see all kinds of movements. There's political movements, there's social movements. Some of them come and go, and as they mature or solve that problem, they actually become mainstreamed and then go away. So there's all kinds of movements. When we use the word gospel movement, we're applying it there to mean at least one or two things. One is the fuel or dynamic that produces the motivation for change comes from our identity in Christ. So we're both trying to be people of the way who said, Jesus is changing us, he's sanctifying us, and we want to see that be the message and fuel for what we want to do. But it also has a bit of a telos to us. Where is this going? What kind of movement do we want to see? So we talk about the qualities, the attributes that we'd like to see happen. How do we see more shalom? How do we see the body of Christ living out its fullness? How do we think about a gospel movement in a city that would care for the poor and integrate faith and work? So so it's both the fuel and motivation and also a bit of maybe some of the features that we'd like to see. And so that's how we would, or at least that's one way that I think about it.
So let's get back to that part two, but here I am throwing another question into the mix. Why do we talk about it so much? Why do we care about it so much?
Yeah, I think because to see, if the vision is to see a renewing city, a city that displays more justice and mercy and goodness, and the arts are used in life-giving ways, and the citizens are flourishing, it's probably going to require many of them. That's not true, and so it's going to require some of the things that a movement can do. So we're realizing it's going to take a movement to kind of bring that kind of renewal and change. It may never actually happen because part of what a movement's trying to do is actually to gather momentum through more and more leaders being impacted by that vision for change, and they bring it to their friends and their neighbors. So there's not enough momentum, there's not enough trajectory of health just to say, well, we can just build another church. Plus, it creates other conditions of sacrifice. Motivation to stay, motivation to pray for those things, realizing it's beyond my individual resources and it doesn't rely on me. So I think that's why we would say God has, in the history of the church, seen movements produce change in cities and countries. He's done it before. Perhaps he could do it again. He may not. It's his providential pleasure to do it or not. So this is things that we seek. And we know that we couldn't produce it by just a couple ministries. It's actually going to take dozens and dozens of ministries growing and proliferating. Plus, maybe one difference between a movement and a ministry is something that we can kind of say, hey, we have oversight for these things and we can kind of control it. Right. A movement we can't really control. We want it to become viral in a really good way. And we know that that's what's going to have to take place. So leaders that want to see a movement have to be put in place, I would say, activities, characteristics, dispositions that allow that, so we actually don't make them a barrier.
Right.
We want to be kind of enhancers of that to happen. So how we behave, what we do, where we apply resources, encourages those movement dynamics, but they can also discourage them if we're not careful.
Yeah. Mark, going back to that legacy aspect, given your decades-long vantage point with all of this work, what is it that we are building on now? Chris always reminds us that fruitfulness we see today, that's grandmas having been praying for decades in basements that no one ever saw or realized, at least not mainstream folks realizing that. So what is it that we could celebrate that we're building on at this stage of, the New York ecosystem?
Yeah, I love history, and I love the trajectories that have influenced where we are today. It's a lot of themes there that we could talk about. Maybe I'll isolate one or two. One of them I think that's important is that the church began to grow and see church planting happen, particularly like in Queens and Brooklyn, by the shifts in immigration into those places and the Bronx. So historically, New York was shaped a lot by Europe, and many of them were not people of believing in supernatural Christianity. But the people that began migrating here in the 70s and 80s, particularly out of boroughs, were, and they began creating churches, and they became people of faith that kind of changed the spiritual profile of those communities. Not necessarily Manhattan at the time. So we're seeing the legacy of those faithful Christians who came here in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Planting churches, revitalizing churches. The second theme I would say is in the 80s, Mac Peer, a leader who led an organization called Constant Prayer, began gathering leaders for prayer. In the 80s, that's I think when they started, and still meet every year for prayer. So there were decades of pastors primarily, and I'm sure lay leaders as well, participating in praying. So Mac and the leaders that he was connected with prayed that God would bring some kind of movement here to the city. And then as a result of 9/11, which created disorientation in the city, began to see leaders thinking about, what could my contribution be to serve New York City? And they began coming here and planting churches and serving existing churches. So all that prayer base and all the relationships that Mac had was an important catalyst to then beginning to start the influence then in Manhattan that had begun maybe 20 years earlier in the outer boroughs. So that's a little bit of the legacy and trajectory that we're benefiting from today.
I next asked Steve to share his thoughts on the challenges and opportunities for ministry in Manhattan, particularly regarding church planting and the gospel movement over the next decade or so. He began by reflecting on the fragile nature of ecosystems, especially in a place like Manhattan. I appreciated him sharing his own personal journey and understanding just how much the margins play a crucial role in informing the center. This realization has shaped Steve's understanding of gospel movements, emphasizing the interconnectedness of all parts of the city. Let's listen in as Steve shares his thoughts, followed by Mark.
I think I would have come in with my background thinking that change is always going to come from a place like Manhattan, where it's I read something recently where there's 349,000 millionaires in Manhattan. I mean, like it's financial capital, cultural capital, whether you want to call it the media, entertainment capital. So if you come up through my sort of education, a city's not going to change. It's weighted the theory of change is weighted toward Manhattan. Like New York City's not going to change unless Manhattan changes. I think there's truth to that, but I think what I've come to understand working with sort of a multi-ethnic set of leaders, particularly in the New York Project, that cut across all the boroughs and understanding more about the ministry in the margins, in the more challenged areas, and that the margins have to inform the center, or have to. Although it's a paternalistic change, like a city's not going to change without both pieces changing, and there's so the margins have to. There's a centering of that in that equation, which I think it's really come to affect the way that I think as a both and I just do a lot of thinking about that in light of, I think, a lot of folks that maybe come from my sort of background or education, thinking that it's one way, and I think what I've learned is no, it's joined in, I think, a beautiful way, and how to do that. And I think you two and the leaders in the New York Project do such a beautiful job in navigating that. I do think it's important, and we want to start churches, all the reasons Mark sort of talked about in terms of sort of that fragility in an ecosystem and how difficult it is in the hard ground of a Manhattan. And we see it in Paris, we see it in London, like other cities like that. But but I think it's linked, given particularly the diversity in this city.
Mark, would you want to add anything as to opportunities and challenges, Manhattan specifically, over the next 10 to 15 years?
Well, I hope the opportunity now, as a result of COVID, is that more and more pastors will see their ministry as not a personal platform, but that's actually building a church that develops leaders and creates disciples. So Amen. Manhattan in particular attracts leaders in which who's it's a city where everybody's trying to audition for something. I'm a good speaker. I want to create a church. I want to create this platform. And we use all kind of religious vernacular for that and talk about calling and all this. But really it was about you. And could you attract enough people to come and hear you speak? But as soon as those conditions change or you don't like it or your wife's unhappy, you leave. So I hope this next generation sees the limitations of that. It's unhealthy. It's not good. And so, look, my goal here is to plant a life-giving church. I'm going to develop leaders. I'm going to do the hard work of developing disciples. I'm going to really learn the heart of the people to see people come to faith in Christ. And I hope the culture is going to increase its expectation. We're even more suspicious about the Christian church. We're even more suspicious about your rhetoric and all these things and your political alignments. We actually want to see, do you know us? Is this about you, or is this about creating a church for the good of the city? I hope that's our opportunity. We attract more leaders like that and they stay.
Yes.
So that would be that's both opportunity and challenge. And then linked to that, I hope, because it's not about them and it's not about them just attracting a bunch of people to church on Sunday, they also go a scale up. So if the scale is the unit of impact of my church, I'm thinking, no, the next scale I really want to impact is my broader community. So I want to link with 5 or 6 other churches or 2 or 3 other nonprofits and see how together can we collectively think about bring shalom here. I think people that are suspicious about the church, doubtful about the church, will go, there's some unusual unity here, and they're caring about their city, and they're not just here to create their own personal ministry platform, and they evaporate when the conditions get difficult. So I hope that's our opportunity and challenge.
Me too.
I've always been known to be pretty hard on assessing church planters and thinking, I don't know if you can do this. I'm suspicious about your calling. You tell me all the stuff you think you're going to do, and where are they? So that's why I think it's really important this time that hopefully the culture has shifted the way people think about ministry in New York, and they're more like, we don't want to go back to some of those models. I know Chris and I, we've talked about that before. We've seen it. We still need congregations that do attract lots of people. I want that for sure. But I want to make sure it's also the church that develops leaders, creates disciples, does evangelism that's really difficult to do, and also cares about the community beyond just how many people come to their church on Sunday. So I think we've always had that posture and desire to do that, but it's been difficult. But I'm hoping today people, the pastors and the people that are on their team, will resonate with that even more. Yes. And saying creating a big, large church is also challenging to do, and maybe something that is maybe not quite as large. So that's what I hope happens.
Man, hear.
Amen. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I'm thinking about like our listeners, that the benefit of this conversation, and that they get to hear from a collective set of leadership experiences that spans multiple decades. And when you've been leading collectively, both of you, the journey you've been on, the spaces God's allowed you to lead for so long, inevitably, we learn some lessons, some hard-earned lessons. And so beginning with you, Steve, would love to hear what are some of those hard-learned lessons in leadership that you've kind of picked up along the way? And then we'll go to Mark. And then there's a follow-up question. As you consider New York City, how do you see those lessons serving leaders in the field?
Hard-earned lessons. I think for me, even in the last 7 years, I think I probably came in with a frame of leadership, had an idea of what I thought a good leader was, and the attributes. And I'll even use the example of, I felt like I understood a church reasonably well as an elder in a church, but I had no idea. And there was a deep arrogance in me. And I think what the Lord's been really doing in me over the last 7 years is almost just reshaping me as a leader. What does it mean? And how do you think about giving power away? Hard-earned lessons of making mistakes along that way and failing in that. But how do you, and just revealing in me, when you hire a business person to come in, you think, oh, well, they should, this pressure, like thinking it's to grow. And I feel like actually the Lord brought me here for some other reasons. I think the ministry is growing and healthy and healthy, but I think I feel like idols of control, idols of competency, things like that. God's been stripping me down. And for me, what does it mean? And he used Henry Nouwen, to lead from downward mobility. And that is it's easier said than done when you quote unquote have a position or you have power, perceived power, and how do you lead in a different way? And because there's lots of pressures to kind of use that power and use it. And you have to really think, I think the Lord, and the other thing the Lord just continues to bend to me. And again, I think I probably came in with certain ideas or elements of combinations, and which had elements of being monocultural, I think, in nature, because just the way that, particularly in finance, that I came out of, and where I've come to believe just the huge value of multi-ethnic teams and healthy ethnic teams, and 1 + 1 equals way more than 2. If you can build teams that are coming from various and diverse perspectives, which sounds easy, but it's very unwieldy. And if you can begin to have teams like that, and if you have a global element in particular to that, I think it's potentially exponential. So, one of the things I have tried to learn early in my career is to at least endeavor to, using the word ecosystem, to have an organization or ecosystem that is allowed to have failure. Because back when I know, Mark, you'd remember this, but in the 80s, you guys, I don't know, old enough, but you remember New Coke? New Coke came out, if you remember New Coke, right? Well, the CEO of Coke was a guy named Roberto Goizeta or something like that back then. And I still remember the name Sergio Zyman was the head marketing guy of Coca-Cola Atlanta. And he'd already had huge success with Diet Coke. They spent $100 million, I remember, to launch this New Coke, massive failure. Now, he got fired. And they positioned, and they then became for a while Classic Coke, if you remember that.
Yeah,
that's right. That term. And so they kind of flipped it. But Goizeta said later he hired Zyman back because he said you have to have organizations that you'll never get innovation unless you allow people to fail. And that's a hard dynamic, particularly in business. It's hard because you're trying to hit stock prices and going back to differences. But even in a ministry ecosystem, it's how do you allow people to reach and sometimes fail? And then how do you think about that concept?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mark?
Yeah, that question, hard lessons learned, is kind of foregrounded by what were the problems that you created by the kind of leader that you were, right? So many, but maybe two that pops to my mind right now. I think in the first 10 to 15 years that I was here, I realized that a lot of leaders coming into my office talking about different things that were on their mind or out in the field with leaders. And I think at times, and still am today, I have to be careful, I was trying to be too clinical, too forensic with them, too helping diagnose problems, but realizing it's a human being that has all kinds of issues and things that are before them, and they're wanting validation, they're wanting encouragement. They're not just there because they have a problem that is the kind of thing they're presenting to you. So I think as a result of not displaying good emotional intelligence and treating it maybe like transactions at times, I was not effective in those conversations. So a lot of learning about how do I continue to be better at asking good questions? How do I try to be a good facilitator of helping them discover what they need to know? So those were things that were hard lessons learned. And my wife and others kept saying, Mark, yeah, you've got to be better at this. You got to care about people. You have to shepherd them through, and you have to understand them and just not give them what you know. So it still would be a weakness of mine, but hopefully I'm better than I was for those that may have known me maybe 10 years ago. The second thing I would say, there probably were 2 seasons in the last 20 years, and maybe more than that, but where a season of prayerlessness came upon me. And maybe some of the reasons were just discouragement, maybe confidence that things were going well. But I remember going away with some people, and somebody asked us a question and said, hey, what's going on with you personally? And I remember writing that on a piece of paper, and I said, that's not the kind of leader I want to be, and it's not good for me. It's not good for my soul. It's not good for ministry. And so had to bring change to that. So I'm always trying to be a student of prayer because it's a muscle that's easy to lose. And but those 2 times of feeling a bit of like that muscle has atrophied required me to come back and renew it again and again.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah, please.
I just think about when Mark was talking, I think that what I've learned, what I've been to learn about, talking about what for the New York City ecosystem, what would I desire? I think Redeemer City to City, because of Tim, and it's got a lot of gospel intelligence. It's got a lot of smarts. It's got a lot of white papers and writing. And I think what was also beautiful about Tim, obviously, was his humility. And I think we talk about what does it mean to be a leader of no reputation? And we talked about, and I know for me, that's been part of the change when you go through a season, and I've been through a couple where you, in leadership, oftentimes you have seasons that you can't defend. You had to make a decision, but because of reasons you might not be able to articulate everything why you've done that, and you may get attacked in different ways, and you can't defend your quote unquote reputation. And I think the Lord's been stripping me of that. And I think of Philippians 2 and just this pouring out. And I think I had a wrong-headed view of servant leadership, which is a big term, which is it got great aspects, but I think in Philippians 2, you usually are servant leading, at least my heart was, to get something. And when I really cut down the motives, but what is it where Jesus emptied himself, right? I mean, and how do you lead that way? That's the kind of leaders I'm hopeful for in New York City and globally around, because it creates an adhesion and a stickiness that and I think gospel movement, I think amazing things can happen. I mean, so I think there's a head part and a massive heart part to leadership. So anyway.
Thank you.
I felt like you were going to jump in and say something.
No, it was so profound. I was just absorbing it. Yeah. Beautiful words.
Yes.
I've been looking forward to asking this question because I knew that you both would add so much value, and I just want to name, I really appreciate the humility, the honesty. I hope that folks that would hear this would be struck by that, that after many decades of leadership, the lessons that you guys have learned are ones of deep character and humility and graciousness. It wasn't, you didn't talk about you didn't sound like a leadership guru, and maximize your potential and et cetera. That's not, you were coming at it from this really just humble Jesus space. And so I just want to appreciate that. Yes. So thank you. As a quick follow-up to the second part of the question, and you kind of began to add into that, which I loved. As you consider New York City, How do you see those lessons serving leaders in the field? Beginning with you, Mark, and
sure.
closing thoughts.
Well, I hope those that are facilitating and coaching leaders and training will see that they're interacting with a person who has a lot that's probably going on and needs encouragement, needs prayer. So let's make sure we're attentive to how the Spirit is leading us. Let's ask good questions. Yeah. Let's make sure that people are understood before we try to help them in any way.
That's good.
Because ministry can be lonely, can be discouraging. So how do we, in a really good way, be very available, ready, eager, interacting, and enjoying those moments with leaders? So ministry is about one human talking to another often. So how do we, to me, I enjoy those opportunities a lot more than I did, let's say, 10 years ago when I thought I had to accomplish something through them, or I had to be the Messiah for that person who needed help with an issue because I wasn't sure where else they could go. So I felt an obligation. I still want to help them, but I feel a little bit more free from that. And then second, I hope everything that we do is rooted in prayer, and in particular, continuing to strengthen prayer at every scale we're working at. So the scale in my family, in my personal life, in my church, in the network that I'm involved with. How is prayer not something that is a program or an element, but it's the way we associate a meal, where to make that meal attractive, we put salt on it. So I think about prayer being that way. How is it seasoned with everything that we do? It's natural. It's something we desire. And we do it because we know that both what we're seeking to do is not possible. And also because it gets us closer to God, and we enjoy having fellowship and intimacy with Him. So whenever I'm praying, particularly on my own, that's what I'm doing. I'm jealous to say, God, bring delight and joy in my heart. That's what I want. That needs to be the fuel. If you're not doing that, I don't know how much further I can go. So I always make that kind of my goal every morning, if I can, to get a sense of that rich joy from having time with Him. But He doesn't always do that, so I can't expect it, but that's what I seek.
Good word.
Yeah. I think one of the things in this job that I feel like I never thought this job over there is more important but I felt a different weight in this job. And when I came into this position, it was about, hey, someone said to me, get people around you, make sure you kind of quote unquote got your spiritual house in order in a sense, because you're part or leading an organization that's endeavoring to plant hundreds, if not thousands, of churches, or use orthodox expressions. And there is an enemy. I feel like I've dealt with more difficult issues in 7 years than I did in 30 years. Wow. And a lot of that is reasons in ministry, things are elevated, and there's lots of reasons, but there's an enemy. And going back to my desire for pastors is that their identity, that their gospel character is so critical, and that there are those safe places around them, because ministry is so hard. And I did have an arrogance, I think, coming as a business person. Like a lot of people think, oh, how hard is it, right? And now I have a totally different view, particularly for church planters. So hard. It is so difficult here in New York, and then, of course, globally we see it. But how that gospel identity gets attached to Jesus and not to performance or the church, and that failure is not fatal.
That is good. Thank you.
All right. So our work in New York has been about training healthy missional leaders, helping to start and strengthen missional churches all over the city, and also, investing in new homes, physical buildings that would allow for long-term impact and movement in New York. Thinking back over, the last few years, starting with you, Mark, just tell us, how has God surprised you?
So I think the positive surprises has been that through COVID, that the church leaders continued to start churches. So I'm still amazed at leaders that had the resiliency to start churches, and the number of leaders that actually were leading churches have continued. So there hasn't been a lot of attrition or churches that didn't make it through over the last decade or more. So I'm surprised by that. I would have thought that it would have been more churches that didn't make it through. We know that leaders may have left their congregations and gone somewhere else, but others have taken over for them. So I'm thankful for the kind of those that came behind them to lead those congregations. I'm surprised. I think that there is a good mosaic of leaders representing denominational diversity, ethnic diversity, socioeconomic class, etc., that are on mission together and want to be friends. And I think trust is still pretty high and respect for one another. That's my experience. So I think all the things that could kind of thin that out haven't happened. So surprise might be a strong word, but very thankful, rejoicing in.
All right.
Would be where I am today with those things. Yeah.
Right.
That's good.
Thank you, Mark. How about for you, Steve?
Well, I mean, I was just out in LA and just seeing the work that's going on at City LA is amazing. But when I have any conversation, I mean, I can't have imagined. I think if I was not in New York City and not get the benefit of being around leaders like yourselves and the other parts of the New York Project work and the leaders that we get to interface with here in New York City, could I have imagined that in the last 7 years, there'd be 170 or so new churches that have been started? I mean, I would want to say I would have wanted to say, yes, I think that could happen. I would want to have said but I don't know I would have been truthful. But like, amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, praise the Lord that there are 170 new churches, gospel expressions around the city. And I just keep praying for, like, could there be 500, 1,000? When we look back, you know, I always joke that I'm not going to live long enough to see some of this, because that's the thing about ministry. You know, in business, it's you get a stock price every day or whatever. But like, no, this is long-tailed outcomes. And so as you know, as a donor or partner, there's an investment. Do I trust the leaders? Do I trust the strategy? Because you may not see all, you may see streams of light or little pieces or parts of it. But I always think about what could be. What could be in New York City or Manhattan? Like, and that's what animates me and gets me out of bed, and like is just exciting to think not just what's happening here, but we get to see this in other cities around the world. And so that's exciting to me.
A question that we've asked all of our guests during this first season of this podcast, which we have taken somewhat of a deep dive with leaders specifically in Manhattan, looking at just the gospel legacy in New York City, but through the lens of the borough of Manhattan. When you pray for New York City, and we're very influenced by the idea of kingdom prayer at City to City. As we train church planters, we train them to ground their churches in these outward focused, neighborhood-oriented prayers, not just for their churches alone, but like wanting to see gospel renewal in our city. And so when you pray, God, let the kingdom come to New York City, what does that look like for you? If the kingdom comes according to those prayers, what would be different about New York? If you could just give us that picture, that visual, that sense, we'd love to hear that as we close our time together.
What I have learned from people like Mark Reynolds and others, and Jen, you and Chris, is like, I know, and I live in Manhattan, so what I'm really hopeful for is that even I think there's a tendency in Manhattan for some churches, at least, to be very insular, or and I think we talk a lot about the need. Even Redeemer, right? It always described itself as a church, not for itself, but for the city. Or like, how do churches in this, particularly in Manhattan, learn from the churches outside of Manhattan. Because I think sometimes there can be an arrogance or, hey, that's different over there. And there are differences and complexities, et cetera. But what I'm hopeful for, if a city's going to change, I've learned enough that it's going to take more than one denomination, more than one expression. How do the tribal lines, tribal barriers come down? And churches, parachurch, like how do we begin to work together for the flourishing of a city?
Mark.
Yeah, great question. And one of the things that I like to do, I live near Riverbank State Park, that for those of you who don't live in New York, it kind of is extended out into the Hudson River around the 140th, and it has some really good views of the city. And so when I walk and jog through there, I often stop and pray in this one part of the park. So I can look out and I can see a lot of beautiful buildings, but I know there's also a lot of humans and a lot of inhabitants there, a lot of brokenness. And so the things that I'm often praying for is, first, I pray for the next generation of younger leaders that will be leading churches and multiplying churches, so that the churches themselves, so if I think about what I love to see, is that the church itself becomes so healthy that it naturally produces lots of leaders. And we've got such fruitfulness in this community because of our community engagement, our evangelism, our discipleship, that a church just starts from that. So it's an organic thing. It naturally happens versus kind of engineering it and all the strategy that we many times have to do. So what I pray for, again, is this next generation of leaders, and they would be in their communities, pouring into them, loving their city, and that then those who then kind of refracting back, I think that there's certain things in their city or their community that are pain points. It could be educational inequality. It could be, urban young youth who don't, if you look at Black and brown brothers and sisters, or people, Black and brown, whether they're brothers and sisters in Christ or not, high unemployment rates. I would love to see those things so remarkably go down. Like in my community, I see men often just walking the streets that I don't think have jobs. I would love to see that there's enough change in my community that those things decrease. Educational inequality decreasing. Those are just signs of, I think, that the citizens of the city would want to see. I hope the church does get to be a part of that. But because of the foundations that they're building for the kind of church that they are and the way that they go about serving and loving the city.
Wow.
It's a beautiful picture.
Thank you both. We're so grateful that you took the time to be with us, and we're just so grateful that we get to serve alongside both of you, and thank you for your many, many years of faithful leadership, and that we get to be a part of what God's doing in this city that we love. Thank you both.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Gospel Legacy in New York City, a podcast brought to you by City to City, New York City.
We hope you've enjoyed this conversation with Steve and Mark, as they've shared substantial insights into understanding ministry in New York City and the globe through their many lessons learned and decades of leadership experience. Stay tuned for more inspiring stories and insightful discussions in our upcoming episodes. In this episode, we touched on some concepts such as gospel ecosystem and how city transformation, or city flourishing, requires a holistic approach where both the center and the margins influence each other. To learn more about what city to city means when we use these terms, check out our show notes or visit our podcast website, www.gospellegacynyc.com, where we link some additional resources and insights on city theology and city theory, core elements explored in our book, Gospel-Centered City Ministry, The City to City DNA. This book aims to cultivate a deeper understanding of the core elements of Redeemer City to City. Throughout 18 white papers and videos, organization co-founder Timothy Keller explores the key concepts behind planting a gospel-centered church, from establishing a theological vision to learning the way people in our communities think.
Be sure to tune in next time as we continue exploring the impact of the gospel in New York City, hearing from more pastors and leaders who are shaping communities to be salt and light here. You don't want to miss it. If you've enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and share it with a friend. For more information and to stay connected with our community, please visit us at www.citytocity.nyc. Until next time, we pray that God's church will faithfully reflect the beauty of the gospel in every corner of New York City and wherever you are as well.